following program is exclusively produced and distributed by Dick Dinman's Double D Productions, Inc., all rights reserved.
Hi, Golden Age film fanatics, and welcome to DVD Classics Corner on the Air. My name is Dick Dinman, and our goal is to become your exclusive guide to the very best of the Golden Age classics coming out on DVD. We'll have reviews, breaking news of upcoming releases, plenty of surprise guests, and a special feature devoted to the great Golden Age film composers, which we call Cinemusic. So let's turn on the marquee and lights, camera, action.
It's time for Dick's Picks, in which I get to shine the spotlight on one of my Dick's Picks of the week. For as long as I can remember, the original William Wellman-directed Technicolor classic A Star Is Born could only be seen in some of the most ghastly transfers ever displayed on VHS, DVDs, and Blu-rays. And frankly, I'm still vainly attempting to erase from my mind the most recent atrocity released on Blu-ray by Kino Lorber a few years ago. Imagine my shock when viewing the Warner Archive's recent Blu-ray release of A Star Is Born, the source of which was the original 3-strip Technicolor negative. Such vivid, vibrant colors which intensified the film's magnificent production design to a point never ever seen before, by far besting even the film's original Technicolor release. And if that weren't enough, the elements of George Pal's Cinerama delight, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, were in such utter disrepair that fans of this magical film had long since given up the notion that this film would ever see the light of day on home video. Yet, here it is on Blu-ray in such impeccably lustrous condition that it puts to shame what was viewed at the original first-run reserved seat engagements. And I should know, I was there. Both A Star Is Born and The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm are now available on Blu-ray, courtesy of our friends at the Warner Archive, even as we speak. Stay tuned for more Dick's Picks, coming up on DVD Classics Corner on the Air very soon. And it'll be no surprise to my listeners that today's guest on my show is no one else but the popular and esteemed home video pioneer and Warner Media Library historian, George Feltenstein, who has been my most requested guest on my show since its inception 17 years ago, and has graced my show more than anyone else. Please join me in re-welcoming George Feltenstein. George Feltenstein, welcome back for it's either the 48th or 49th time on DVD Classics Corner on the Air, and as always, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
Well, I'm delighted to be back, and we have a lot to talk about.
We sure do. And let me start by giving you my definition of what I call a miracle restoration. And that definition is when suddenly a restoration, a perfect, beautiful restoration, appears on the marketplace of a movie that no one ever thought they would see in this condition, that have wanted to see it in this condition for years and years and decades. And it's one thing to have one miracle restoration. it's quite another to have two in the same month, and that's what we have here. And we're going to devote the first half of the show to the first restoration, which is, of course, of the original 1937 A Star is Born. And after a break, we'll be talking about this miracle restoration of the wonderful world of the Brothers Grimm. But let's start with A Star is Born. And
Yes.
I have to tell you, I sat back not really knowing what to expect, although with your track record, I should have known. This is one of the most amazing restorations that I've ever seen. It's amazing. And you know, this particular A Star is Born from 1937 has a Rotten Tomatoes approval rating of 100%. And at the time of its release, it was nominated for 8 Oscars, winning 2. And I'd like to start by seeing whether you can straighten me out on some questions I have about A Star is Born.
Of course.
Now, the first thing I know is that the director who was first offered this version of A Star is Born was George Cukor,
Right.
who dismissed it as being too similar to a film I have never seen called What Price Hollywood. So my first question is, you can't really count this A Star is Born as a remake of What Price Hollywood, can you?
No, and this is something we struggle with because we also own What Price Hollywood. We have not done a Blu-ray of West Side, listen to me. That was a Freudian slip, but there was one. We have not done a Blu-ray of What Price Hollywood. However, we did do a remastered DVD of What Price Hollywood, which I will send you.
Please.
And it was probably about 2014 or 2015. We were not at the point in our Warner Archive trajectory, and yesterday, by the way, was our 13th birthday. So, it's been a journey from DVDs that came off Shelf Masters to remastering for DVD, and then entering the Blu-ray world, and eventually remastering Blu-rays to a very high standard.
Yeah.
So in the middle of that, toward the end of our DVD remastering, when we were putting quite a bit of effort into making sure that they were of high quality, and we were actually working off new film element, and it's quite good quality. When you watch the film and then you watch A Star is Born, you see there are similarities in the plot, but it's not two actors, it's a director, and there are enough differences in the plot that no one, RKO wasn't going to sue Selznick, and no one in the Academy was going to take away the original story by credits for A Star is Born and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
They're very different movies, but, in some ways, and I've pointed this out to several people, and it's based on real life, there are elements of the story of A Star is Born which you can even see in movies like Funny Girl.
That's true.
You have somebody up on top with lots of money, meeting a girl who's just starting out, and his fortunes fade as hers rise, and it ends up breaking them apart.
Well, you know, George, the rumor is that the inspiration for A Star Is Born was the marriage between
Rod the Rock?
between Barbara Stanwyck and Frank Fay.
Okay, because I've also heard Rod the Rock, but that would make a great deal of sense.
Yeah.
The marriage of Frank Fay, for anyone who's ever seen a Frank Fay movie, the marriage of Barbara Stanwyck and Frank Fay just leaves a lot of question marks as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. But you know, A Star Is Born was the first film about Hollywood to turn a profit, and also, and more significantly, it was the first 3-strip Technicolor film also to turn a profit. I think it was maybe the 4th 3-strip Technicolor feature.
Yeah.
And none of the previous ones had turned a profit. And this one did.
And they weren't very good movies.
No, God, have you ever tried to sit through that Miriam Hopkins, what was it called?
Oh, Becky Sharp is awful. I don't care how sharp they can make the picture, it's still
awful.
You know, it's a curiosity.
Yeah.
The thing is that this was not Selznick's first Technicolor opus. The first one was The Garden of Allah.
Right.
And that was not a financially successful movie.
No, not at all. But if I were to choose who would get the greatest credit for the sheer wonder of this version of A Star Is Born, I would point fervently in the direction of William Wellman. And you know what it is about William Wellman? I mean, this was a wild, macho guy who did a lot of action films, and he was nicknamed Wild Bill Wellman.
Right.
And the way this is essentially, I don't know whether I'd call it a woman's film, but it has great sensitivity to the female lead. It displays a tremendous amount of sensitivity to this woman, and I kind of sit back and say, wow, William Wellman needs to be totally reevaluated. I don't think he gets enough credit. Do you?
No, he doesn't at all. And my fear is, this is why we want to keep the movies alive and out there. My fear is that, people will forget because he is not mentioned along with John Ford and Frank Capra and a lot of the maverick directors of the golden age of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And he should be.
Right. And how? The versatility of this man is just amazing. And the performances in A Star Is Born. Frederick March, during the 30s, at times had a tendency to overact. At times.
Right.
In this, he is wonderful. I now have a hard time choosing who is the greater Norman Maine, James Mason, who I adore, or Frederick March. I no longer know. I'm guessing that both are pretty much equal in their sensitivity and their wonderful way of conveying the torturous path of this character. Do you have a preference between the two?
I think this is very tough because I love both performances so much.
Yeah.
And they're both magnificent. As I love both films, both film versions so much, and they're quite magnificent, to say the least.
Yeah.
I think this is a performance, Frederick March especially, during the 30s, had some really wonderful roles.
Yeah.
Of course, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he won the Oscar.
Right.
And then in the 40s, I think of Best Years of Our Lives. I think about Inherit the Wind in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And this man was such a great actor.
Yeah.
There was something very nuanced. He didn't, he's playing an alcoholic and a drunk, and he wasn't, playing a drunk the way movie drunks were portrayed up until that time. He gave a very realistic portrayal.
Right.
And
it's a trappy role because you could so easily fall into caricature. So easily.
Without question.
Yeah.
Without question.
And again, I'm assuming William Wellman has to take a certain amount of credit for that, too.
With both of them. I mean, he was an actors/actresses director.
Yeah.
He was, Hitchcock said actors were cattle. We've heard. Various, Cukor was known to be a woman's director, but could obviously direct anything very well.
Yeah.
But, his camera style wasn't, earth-shaking, and what he did with the camera and what he did visually.
Yeah.
All these directors have different little slots where they excelled. Wellman, I think, fills all the checkmark boxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
He really knew what he could do. So to get back to your question, I personally think that James Mason's portrayal in the 1954 version of A Star Is Born is so underappreciated and it's neglected. It's one of the greatest performances in cinema.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't.
I just think of that scene where he's overhearing the conversation between Charles Bickford and Judy Garland.
Yeah.
And the agony he's going through.
Yeah.
Listening. That sticks with me as one of the most amazing performances. And all through the film, he's amazing.
Yes.
Now, moving back to Frederick March, he's taken a very, very difficult role, and it's distinctively his own, and it doesn't fit into categories that are like other roles that we had seen before.
Right.
At the time, I think this film, the reason it made such an impact and was profitable and got 8 Academy Award nominations was because it was, like so many films Selznick was involved in, it was so completely excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm giving an edge to Mason, but the March performance is remarkable, as is, frankly, Janet Gaynor's performance, which I think is terribly underrated.
Right.
In looking back at film history.
Right. No question about it. Now, before we move on to the wonderful world of the Brothers Grimm, I would like to caution my audience. There are 2 versions on Blu-ray of A Star Is Born. The version with the color cover is from Kino Lorber, and I'm going to put this as diplomatically as I can.
You can use it as a coaster.
It stinks.
Yeah.
It's awful. if you want this particular brilliant restoration from this 3-strip negatives, this is the one you want with the black, which is ironic, the black and white cover. And George, I know there have been some comments about you've got the most beautiful 3-strip Technicolor restoration. Why do a black and white cover? And am I incorrect in saying that you took the previous horrible release to account and wanted to differentiate between the two?
That's one of two factors. The first factor is that we looked at the original key art, and that's usually what we always do, and we pride ourselves on
Yeah.
it. And we looked at key art from all over the world, and all of it is, frankly, ugly and tacky looking.
Yeah.
And it's kind of surprising, but that does happen. In the golden age of Hollywood, there were many beautiful movie posters. A Star is Born 1937 did not get one. I actually contemplated putting something on the cover. I mean, we do talk about the restoration on the back in the text, but I thought of putting something on the cover saying the first home entertainment release, the authorized release from Studio Original Negatives. But it seemed that it would be better to say it on the back and not, poison the cover with text.
Yeah.
And that's why we took that approach. So I made a very strong pitch that given that we have the 3 remakes and that we happen to have the negative for the original, I felt that we could make it so incredibly gorgeous, and it would basically, the film deserved it.
Yes.
And if we could do so profitably, it was worth the roll of the dice. And I believe we will be profitable with the release. But when I saw it, and we really put so much work into it, because it's very early Technicolor. We wanted everything to be just right. And we have the references of the original nitrate Technicolor prints of the 30s, which were very soft and had a very muted palette of color. And yet you can see from our disc the way certain colors pop.
Yeah,
To a
indeed.
degree where it almost looks 3D. I can't imagine anyone having this disc and not falling in love with it.
Well, I am going to tell my audience there is only one version of A Star is Born on Blu-ray to purchase, and this, the original 1937 version from the Warner Archive, is the one to buy and savor over and over again. You can take this wonderful restoration, you can freeze frame it and have some of the most beautiful portraits you've ever seen. I mean, we're talking eye-popping here. And we need to move on. We're going to take a very short break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss this other miracle restoration of the wonderful world of the Brothers Grimm with our wonderful guest, George Feltenstein. And we'll be right back after this.
Pause now for station identification.
DVD Classics Corner on the Air is exclusively produced and released by Dick Dinman's Double D Productions, Inc. All rights reserved. And we're back with George Feltenstein, and we are going to talk about the second miracle restoration, and this is, in fact, a miracle, of the original Cinerama, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. And I have to tell you, George, many times we say on the show, God, this Blu-ray looks better than the original release. And we're always correct, because it always does if it's from the Warner Archive. But I saw the Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm in August 1962 on Broadway. It was the first. At
the Capitol?
Yes, it was the first Cinerama film I ever saw. I saw it, and I was not that impressed, even in the first run. As I remember, and again, this was the very first Cinerama film I ever saw, because as a kid, I wasn't interested in travelogues.
Right.
So I remember it as being big, but a little bit on the muddy side. The colors never really seemed to be quite vibrant enough on that gigantic Cinerama screen. And I'm still getting over your Blu-ray of The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, which looks 1,000,000 times better than it looked first run. And what fascinates me is that film preservationist Robert A. Harris estimated, about 3 or 4 years ago, I believe, that the cost of a full digital scan restoration of the best surviving elements would be between $1 and $2 million. Everybody said, we'll never, ever see it on Blu-ray. I mean, we almost gave up on it. And here we go with our heroes, the Warner Archive, and a gentleman named David Strohmeyer, who is a genius as far as I'm concerned.
You are correct.
Can I tell you how I watched this film? I have a curved screen, 65-inch OLED television. I moved my chair up maybe about 2 feet away from the screen and watched the whole film, and I tell you, it was Cinerama all over again. I am a huge fan of what David Strohmeyer has dubbed the Smile Box system. This is remarkable. George, the colors, I mean, this to me is the most amazing restoration of the year. Period.
I don't know what other people have up their sleeve, but because of the particular technical aspects of both dealing with the Cinerama process, and I don't know, Dick, if you watched the documentary.
Oh, my God. The documentary is over 40 minutes. Now, let me tell you something. I watched the entire documentary.
I'm so glad you did.
And I watched David Strohmeyer and his associates doing stuff which totally blew my mind, frame by frame, correcting everything. There is not a... Look, I mean, I am mechanically a moron. you can imagine how overwhelmed I was by what David and his staff had achieved. I'll tell you, George, this wonderful documentary, 40-minute plus documentary about what David Strohmeyer and company had to do to bring this miracle restoration to fruition. He showed the incredible damage, water damage, and, I mean, you name it. I mean, a few years ago, I think maybe as little as 5 or 6 years ago, even he might have looked at that condition and said, well, folks, not yet, not ready. But what he did, frame by frame, is so extraordinary. And the results are, well, what can I say? A miracle restoration. I think this is going to be, despite the obvious cost, very, very profitable for you. People have been asking for this title literally for decades. And there's just nothing like it. So I want to congratulate David and team and Warner for bringing this amazing restoration out.
The hero here is David Strohmeyer. If one man single-handedly was responsible for saving a very, very special film format that had a very limited run in years, it's Dave Strohmeyer.
No question. 2 miracle restorations. The 1937 A Star is Born, seen as it's never been seen before, and the same definitely could be said for this amazing release of The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm in Smilebox, which is the equivalent, smaller, obviously, equivalent of Cinerama, depending on the size of your respective screens. But the experience, the full experience, is there to be savored on both of these fantastic titles forever. And I think this is incredible. I am so thrilled, George, by what you guys have done on these 2 restorations, that I don't want to say much more because I'll just gush forever. We'll go into 2025 and and we can't do that. But congratulations to you, and please give my very best to David Strohmeyer and tell him how I idolize the gentleman.
I certainly will, and I just need to say that this was truly a collaboration because the film is owned by the successors in interest to Cinerama and Warner Brothers, and we scanned all of the film, all of the negatives, all of the separations, and then Dave, on behalf of the legacy company that owns the Cinerama interests, went to town on the restoration. So it was truly a collaboration, and we're so proud of the result. And I think audiences of all ages will be blown away. And if you have a really derriere-kicking system of projection and sound, this film is certainly going to give your system a workout.
Oh, and how. And George, thank you so much for joining me for this wonderful tribute to these 2 great miracle restorations. And I just can't wait to see what you guys come up with next.
Well, there's some surprises in store. You're going to be a very happy gentleman, I believe.
Well, if I will...
As will be your audience.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Thank you again, George.
Thank you, Dick. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's my show for today. DVD Classics Corner on the Air is conceived, written, produced, and directed by me, Double D. And if you'd like to hear some of my older, vintage shows, please go to www.dvdclassicscorner.net, where in addition to the broadcasts, you'll find hundreds of my print reviews of classic DVD releases. So, until next week,
keep well, keep happy, and keep listening.